Writing in The Atlantic on June 16th, Laura Secor describes how the Iranian state forces its citizens to repeat a manufactured history, using the threat of the gallows to cement a public lie. It's a grim picture of narrative used as a cage. Yet, just a few days later, Albert Burneko approached the idea of the lie from a different corner of life. Writing for Defector, Burneko considers the way parents use aspirational stories to nudge children toward a more virtuous identity. A curious friction appears when these two pieces sit side by side. It's worth pausing on the distinction between a story used to suppress the truth through fear and one used to cultivate it through belief. Writing last week, Laura Secor looks at a kind of cruelty unfolding in Iran this year. Beyond the street violence, there is a quieter, bureaucratic theft of identity. Notice how she describes Sam Afshari's mother being handed a pen at the morgue. Secor shows how the state kills its young people and then demands their parents sign away the truth, claiming the victims as martyrs for the very regime that shot them.
The betrayal of the Iranian people. The world has not reckoned with the violence visited on Iranians in 2026. On the night of January 8th, in the low-slung industrial city of Karaj, just northwest of Tehran, a 17-year-old boy named Sam Afshari was killed by Iran's security services. He and his friends were peacefully protesting when the streetlights suddenly went dark. Witnesses saw members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Basij militia on the backs of trucks charge up behind demonstrators, firing .50 caliber machine guns indiscriminately into the crowd. Sam was shot in the back, just below his kidneys, and brought to a hospital alive for surgery. He had a breathing tube in his mouth when, the family believes, IRGC agents visited the hospital and administered Sam a finishing shot to the back of the head. I wish I could tell you that this was the end of the story of his family's torment. It was not. Sam's mother and uncle located his remains in the overflowing morgue of Beheshti Sakineh, Karaj's primary public cemetery. Sam's face was mutilated beyond recognition. His mother identified him by a tattoo on his chest that read, "Mother," and promptly collapsed. The IRGC men running the morgue called her a prostitute and told her that her son was a terrorist. Then they brought her a form to sign, attesting that Sam had been a member of the Basij militia. The state would officially add him to its tally of martyrs killed by violent protesters, rather than honestly account for another nonviolent demonstrator killed by its own men. If she refused to sign it, they told her they would not release the body to her for burial. They also demanded that she pay $1,400 for the bullet that killed her son. Otherwise, Sam would be buried in an unmarked mass grave, as hundreds of others collected at Beheshti Sakineh reportedly were. Sam's family did what they had to do to secure his remains. Even at that, they were permitted no funeral gathering, obituary, or public notice of any kind. They found a gravesite for Sam to share with just one other slain protester, rather than hundreds, in a location that the family fears to name, lest it be desecrated. I heard the story from Sam's father, Parviz, who lives in Germany. He spent the 3 weeks in a hospital on suicide watch after his son's murder. My brain was just sending me error messages, he told me. It was not just a feeling that they killed my son.
It was a feeling that they killed me as well. Iranians have plenty of experience with repression, but neither they nor anyone else has had an experience quite like the first half of 2026. Iran's security services massacred protesters on a historical scale just weeks before Israel and the United States plunged the country into conflict. The war without has since compounded Iran's war within in ways that the world has hardly reckoned with. In January and February, May Sato, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran, was inundated with stories much like Sam's was. They came from families extorted and threatened at Iran's morgues, where they'd gone to collect the remains of their massacred loved ones. The family members either submitted to the indignities, the false testimony, the obscene bullet fees, or were asked for bribes as high as $7,000 to avoid consigning their relatives to mass graves. On some days, Sato told me, she received more than 1,000 emails on this subject. Shaheen Milani of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center told me of a report his organization had received from the family of a teenager who had been transported with the dead to a morgue in the town of Karizak. For 3 days, he hid among corpses, breathing the stench of death and listening to cell phones ringing. Anyone alive who made a bodily sound, the teenager reported, was dealt a finishing shot. There were so many open tabs in my mind, Skylar Thompson, the deputy director of the Human Rights Activists News Agency, a nonprofit that documents human rights abuses in Iran, told me by phone last month. Beyond even the massacre itself was the matter of how the bodies were handled, and the desecration of those bodies, and the violation of dignity for the people and the families that had to identify them. The war has been almost like a gift to the regime, Thompson said. This terrible thing happened, and then everyone's attention was directly drawn away to the conflict. The Islamic Republic has slaughtered demonstrators at random before. It has insulted and denigrated the families of the dead before, demanded bribes for corpses before, refused funerals before. But the sheer scale of the crimes in January was something new, and so was the level of fear among those reporting them. The human rights groups I spoke with were still combing through it all months later. HRNA has so far identified close to 7,000 massacre victims.
The human rights groups are also tallying Iran's civilian war dead, about 1,700 according to Frana, 250 of them children, and tracking a campaign of domestic repression and intimidation that has escalated since the United States and Israel began striking Iran on February 28. The January dead are not yet fully counted. The war dead, too, are not yet fully counted. And the killing of Iranians has not stopped. Iran has executed political prisoners at a rate of one roughly every other day since March 18th. The total number is thought to be close to 40. Some are very young, 18 to 25 years old. Many were arrested during the January protests. I counted 16 as of June 3rd, but the numbers keep climbing. In the past, Milani told me, any one of these death sentences would have been big news. But now, he said, everything is overshadowed by the war and the Strait of Hormuz. In ordinary times, Iran carries out more executions per capita than any other country in the world, and in absolute numbers, it is second only to China. Amnesty International estimates that Iran executed 2,159 people last year. Sato puts the number more conservatively at about 1,600. Normally, only a very small proportion of those executed had been convicted of political crimes. In 2026, that pattern has reversed. Iran appears to have executed fewer people than usual, but 70% of them for political reasons. The war has provided cover for human rights abuses. It has also reinforced the rationale that the regime uses to justify them. The Islamic Republic has always claimed that its domestic opponents were stooges of Israel and the United States, even when those charges were plainly implausible. Now there is a record of activist figures, mainly in the diaspora, calling for American and Israeli strikes on Iran. And American and Israeli leaders have explicitly corroborated the regime's most fevered narratives by promising, cynically, fecklessly, that their military onslaught was meant to benefit Iran's domestic opposition. Since the war began, according to the Center for Human Rights in Iran, Iranian officials have made repeated direct threats to the citizenry, warning of lethal violence against any individuals protesting or perceived to be collaborating with the enemy. By collaboration, the regime includes any form of peaceful dissent. Hadi Khaemi, who runs CHRI, worries that this kind of language is meant to desensitize the regime's supporters, more numerous now by many accounts than before the war, to an imminent campaign of violence. Public communication channels are being used to excite the base and normalize what is coming, Khaemi told me. Among other posts and public announcements, he pointed to a statement that Salar Abnoush, an Iranian official, had made on state-run television on March 5th. Parents, if your son or daughter doesn't listen, it's not our fault. Anyone in Iran today whose voice echoes in line with the enemy, the ground beneath their feet is Tel Aviv and their head is Netanyahu. Their execution order has been issued. No one has spoken to you this clearly before. We don't want your child to be killed, but your child is ignorant, unaware.
A new espionage law, which emerged out of last summer's 12-day war with the United States and Israel and came into effect in October, has made such collusion easier than ever to charge and prove. The law criminalizes virtually all contact with the United States and Israel. Passing along information, seemingly of any kind, to American or Israeli entities, also seemingly of any kind, could incur a charge of sowing corruption on earth, which is punishable by death. Both Sato and Thompson suspect that the espionage law has had a chilling effect on their work. People are more fearful of the consequences of communicating with us, Thompson said, even if they've been talking with us for 10 years. Political prisoners executed since the war began have routinely been accused of colluding with the United States and Israel. Officials and state media have labeled those arrested during and since the January protests traitors, terrorists, agents of foreign powers, and Iran collaborators, according to Amnesty International. HRNA representatives told me that some 350 forced confessions were broadcast on national television in January alone, and in them, detainees largely claimed under duress that they had been misled by foreign actors, had been paid by foreigners to participate in protests, or had provided Iran's enemies with sensitive information. No one who has observed the Islamic Republic's treatment of dissent over the past 4 decades will find the language about foreign collusion surprising.
What is remarkable is the scale and the single-minded systematic efficiency. About 7 years ago, Parviz Afshari, Sam's father, lived in Karaj and worked for a conglomerate whose essential purpose was to confiscate private property from dissidents, ethnic minorities, and other people disfavored by the government. By Zoom, from Germany, where he is now in exile, Afshari told me that after about 3 years of this employment, he raised objections to what he was being asked to do. Many of the people he was taking things from had nothing else. They were treated callously. Was all of this really necessary? Afshari's critique was apparently unwelcome. The fact that the conglomerate he worked for was directly managed by the supreme leader probably did not help. He spent a couple of months in temporary detention, and he learned that he could ultimately be sentenced to as many as 10 years in prison. He fled the country instead. His wife and son stayed behind for Sam to finish his schooling, but Afshari intended for them to follow him. To that end, Sam studied 3 European languages. He was fluent in German. He was working toward a degree in IT. But before Sam could get his European visa, he was killed. In recent months, the Islamic Republic's habitual seizure of property from those it has designated as its domestic enemies has been amped up and systematized. In March, the regime announced a new digital system called Saham that would help courts and prosecutors swiftly identify and seize the assets of those it deemed enemy agents. The main target here is the diaspora. The Islamic Republic can't imprison exiled activists, but many still have real estate or bank accounts in Iran, or have family who do. Those abroad who participate in gatherings will have their assets seized within 48 hours, Amir Hussein Alate, a lawyer affiliated with the government, announced on March 11. Official sources claim that the Islamic Republic has seized property from more than 750 people inside and outside Iran since March. 2 decades ago, when I used to travel to and report from Iran, the penal system was a labyrinth of competing interests. Many political prisoners didn't know who held them or had control over their fates. It could be the judiciary or rogue elements within the judiciary, the intelligence ministry or rogue elements within the intelligence ministry, the IRGC's proprietary intelligence agency, the office of the supreme leader, a secretive cadre of clerics, or an opaque, mafia-like network that webbed across them all. You might figure a few things out based on where you were held: the Intelligence Ministry's Section 209 or the IRGC's Section 2A, both in even prison, another known prison, a holding pen at the airport, or a black site of indeterminate location. You'd pay attention to which judge was assigned your case. Sometimes the various agencies and actors disagreed. Sometimes a powerful entity might even seek to protect someone a rival sought to condemn. My contacts in the Iranian human rights world have told me that this friction is largely a thing of the past. According to Kami, the IRGC's intelligence agency has consolidated control over interrogations, detention centers, judges, and prosecutors, and the proof is in the lack of acquittals. You can look at case after case. None is dismissed, Kami said. A dossier is presented, and the judge accepts it. Julie Hesius, an advocacy officer at Hrana,
told me that the trend is one of significantly long-standing. She noted, quote, greater alignment and coordination between the IRGC and judicial authorities. This is evident in some of the statements, public messaging, and threats issued by both institutions, which suggest a closer relationship than before. Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are apparently disappointed in Iran's storied opposition. They imagined, in all of their incurious arrogance, that decapitation strikes on Iran's supreme leader and other high-profile officials would deliver the organs of state into the hands of the people. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach, Trump told the Iranian people the night he started the war. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass. What a misreading of the moment that was. War has instead done what it usually does, empowered the powerful, rallied the faithful, and allowed an apparatus of repression to present its imperatives in terms of national security.
Trump, of course, is as indifferent to the fate of Iran's civilians as he is ignorant of their circumstances. But there is still one gesture he could make, in service not of the Iranian political opposition per se, but of the forgotten cause of human decency, toward a population protected neither by its own regime nor by anyone else. The next time he shoots for the deal of the century, he could add to his list of pie-in-the-sky demands a few that would cost him and the Islamic Republic next to nothing. The release of those arbitrarily detained, an end to political executions, and a respectful burial for the dead.
Secor's account of the Iranian state's machinery leaves a chilling image. A mother forced to pay for the bullet that killed her son, Sam Afshari, only to then sign a document claiming he died for the very regime that shot him. It's a narrative of martyrdom imposed by force, where the state hijacks a family's grief to fix its own official history. The truth is actively overwritten by a state-mandated script that turns victims into props. Turning to Albert Burneko, the lens shifts from the political to the domestic, yet the weight of storytelling remains. Where Secor describes a narrative used to crush dissent, Burneko explores a narrative used to build a person. He argues that truthfulness isn't an innate trait, but a virtue to be gained, often through the aspirational stories parents tell their children about who they are. The interesting thing here is the shared realization that identity is shaped by the labels we accept. In Iran, the martyr label is a tool of state coercion used to bury the facts of a massacre. For Burneko, telling a lying child that they are a truth teller is a different kind of fiction, one intended to give the child a virtuous identity to inhabit. One story is used to secure a burial, the other is used to secure a future.
Welcome back to Minor Dilemmas, where a member of Defector's Parents Council will answer your questions on surviving family life. Have a question? Email us at minordilemmas@defector.com. This week, Albert answers a question about kids and lying. Greg, in a recent fun bag, there was an email about a mother defending her son from an accusation of theft, saying, "My son doesn't lie to me." This was great and heartwarming, but it got me thinking that anyone who works with kids or teens knows that they frequently do lie, and often the parents are the only ones who don't know it or want to admit it. How do you balance supporting and defending your child without falling into, "my kid is a perfect angel who would never do anything wrong"? Here is a thing that trips up new parents sometimes. Your new baby comes into a world you thought you knew as a place where people are, by nature, deeply imperfect, where everybody makes mistakes, where lying is quite common, where everybody does stuff when they think no one is looking that would gross out people who otherwise respect and love them, where this is inherent to the human condition, and the heart of mercy is the recognition of that fact. And your baby is perfect, a perfect little flawless thing, made of love itself, capable of no evil. You never imagined something like this could exist. And you, who 5 minutes ago believed yourself just the right amount of jaded and world-wise about this stuff, now hold in your arms the one pure thing, and it is so fragile, and the world can only ruin it. This child could never tell a lie, you think, even if you do not consciously think it. For as long as I can protect this child from the evil of the world, she will love truth. When she opens her mouth, truth will come out,
as reflexively and openly and naturally as air goes in. She will never feel truth, due to being an untainted crystallization of love itself. And then one day she tells a lie, and you think, oh no, she ate the apple. I have failed in my sacred mission. Now she is a dirty, ruined liar like me. Buddy, that is a real bummer. You fool. You poor, beautiful sap. You were so lovingly exactly wrong. Children do not come predisposed to truth. They do not come with any idea that there even is such a thing. Truthfulness is not an inherent trait they lose via corruption or because their parents failed to protect them from the world. It is a virtue they have to gain. Helping them gain it is your job. Where was I going? Right. Okay.
More and more, I am convinced that a huge part of the work of parenting, maybe even the biggest after the basic keeping the child alive stuff, is the story you tell your children about who they are, about what you treasure in them, and whether they believe you. In turn, the biggest part of the work of growing up is discovering who you are and what kind of person you want to be. Maybe your hope is that you can raise your kids to be resilient, or compassionate, or brave, or imaginative, and so you help them to see themselves that way. Not by puffing them up with a lot of bullshit, but by marking the moments when you see in them what you hope they will grow to see in themselves. Wow, you were so brave for your flu shot. It was scary and it hurt a little, but look at you. You shook it off like nothing. Or, thank you for playing with Spot this afternoon. He's very lucky to have a friend like you who makes time for him and plays the games he likes. Or, and here is where I was going with all of this, it took a lot of courage and character for you to tell me that you'd broken my framed 70-inch print of the cover of Iron Maiden's 1982 album, The Number of the Beast, which I insist on hanging above the living room sofa, due to it being a cool thing to have occupying an entire wall of one's living room and not actually embarrassing at all, no matter what literally everyone who is not me says. This is not the same as bullshitting them, except for the part about the album cover. But it does at times require you to take an adventurous approach to your interpretations of things. Maybe they weren't particularly brave for their flu shot. Maybe they played with the dog for their own enjoyment, and the dog's satisfaction was purely incidental. Maybe you literally watched them break your bitchin' poster, on purpose, acting on the direct order of your spouse, and they simply did not deny it or run away when you fell to your knees and began screaming. That's fine. This story's purpose is not to be entirely true now, but to become true later. I guess I'm sort of dancing around whatever will have to pass as the direct response part of this blog.
The truth is, I am not convinced of the necessity of the balance Greg asks about way back up there at the beginning, of supporting and defending your child without falling into my kid is a perfect angel who would never do anything wrong. I suppose there are edge cases. If your child turns out to be a serial murderer, you should not unconditionally insist upon their innocence. And in general, I think it is good to aspire to see people and things clearly, as they truly are. Your kid would lie to you, and has. They have done things wrong and will do more things wrong. But in truth, I do not actually believe that what harms young people, what turns them into adult shitheads, is somebody thinking the absolute world of them. Someone who sees them as good, trustworthy, and honorable, and insists upon the default position of believing the things they say. In fact, I think it's good for them to have that, and I wish every kid could. Both for practical reasons and because I love them, I would rather my kids experience sorrow at disappointing my lunally sky-high opinion of them than experience shame at proving my low opinion of them correct. I would feed myself to a shark to protect them from the latter. Here is a story. My kid got in trouble one night, several months ago, while he was out away from home. I am not going to get into the details of why he was in trouble because it's his life and not mine. Suffice to say that what he had done was not illegal, immoral, cruel, or ill-intentioned. But nevertheless, he shouldn't have done it and he had gotten in trouble. He told me a story about what he had done that had gotten him in trouble. I had no way of verifying it, and because what he told me seemed like no big deal, if anything, I thought he seemed to be overreacting, I didn't feel any particular need to check up on it. Mostly, it was late at night, and I wanted him to calm down and get some sleep so we could figure things out in the morning. So I reassured him that everything would be okay, said goodnight, and sat back down to finish whatever it was I'd been doing. A few minutes later, he walked back into the room, visibly afraid, and told me the truth.
He'd been lying before, and the infraction and the trouble he'd gotten in for it were both significantly more serious than he'd portrayed. It was something he worried might change how his mom and I saw him forever.
I don't know exactly what prompted him to make the decision to come back and tell the truth of his own volition. There probably wasn't one single reason. It took courage in any case. Whatever consequence he was afraid of that made him make up a phony story in the first place was still in play, and now he'd piled lying to his dad on top of it. I would never, ever have corrected the lie in that situation at his age. No, sir. I would ride that lie down to the bottom of a well. But the story I will tell him and myself forever is that on a night when so much else had gone sideways for him and he'd screwed up in ways that seemed, to his teenage-calibrated imagination, like they might change things in his life, he felt accountable to the story we have all been working to make true since he was born, and which was at its absolute truest when he made that short walk from his bedroom to where he came clean. That he was and is a good and honest guy by continual courageous choice. That walk must have seemed long and fearsome. He made it because of who he believes he is, who we believe he is, and who he wants to be. It's one of the proudest moments of my whole life.
The shadow of a state-enforced lie in a Tehran cell feels worlds away from the soft glow of a nursery, yet both rely on the power of a script to shape a life. One uses fear to erase history, the other uses hope to draft a future. What lingers is the sense that the stories told about a person often carry more weight than the ones told in private. If the truth is something that can be cultivated or crushed by a narrative, how can anyone ever be sure where the story ends and their own skin begins?